Oh Lord, it's good to be here with you. I need to tell you something that's gonna sound absolutely wild at first, but stick with me because this changed everything for me. You're not boring. I know. You're probably thinking I'm about to feed you some feel good nonsense that doesn't actually help. But hear me out because I used to be convinced I was the most boring person on planet Earth. Like, genuinely convinced that my personality had the depth of a puddle and the excitement level of watching paint dry in slow motion. Imagine this: you're at a party, or maybe just talking to someone at work, and you can literally see their eyes glazing over while you're talking. You watch them check their phone, look around the room, maybe even fake a yawn. And in that moment, you're thinking to yourself, yep, there it is, proof that I'm boring as hell. I've been there so many times I lost count. And every single time I walked away thinking the problem was me, my personality, my interests, my entire existence, basically. But here's the thing that blew my mind when I finally figured it out. Those moments weren't proof that I was boring. They were proof that I had no idea how conversations actually worked. See, I used to think being interesting meant having crazy stories, or knowing tons of random facts, or being naturally charismatic like those people who just light up a room. So I'd try to force myself to be that person, and it would backfire spectacularly every single time. Let me tell you about one of my worst moments. I was on a date, right? And I was so terrified of being boring that I prepared like I was going into battle. I had stories ready, I had jokes memorized, I even researched current events so I'd have smart things to say. And you know what happened? I talked for what felt like 14 and a half hours straight, just absolutely steamrolling this poor person with my prepared material. At one point, I literally saw her soul leave her body while I was explaining some documentary I'd watched about penguins. Penguins. On a date. The conversation wasn't just dead, it was murdered in cold blood, and I was holding the weapon. And the worst part? I walked away from that date thinking, see, I'm just boring. There's nothing I can do about it. But that wasn't the problem at all. The problem was I thought conversation was a performance, and I was trying so hard to be interesting that I forgot to actually be a human being. Here's what nobody tells you about being boring. It's not about your personality, your hobbies, or how exciting your life is. It's about your approach to connection. I used to think I needed to be fascinating, but what I actually needed was to be curious. I used to think I had to entertain people, but what I actually needed was to understand them. And this isn't just me making stuff up to make you feel better. I did the research. I went deep into this because I was desperate to figure out what was wrong with me. I found myself reading this 100-page document about communication and social connection, and one thing kept coming up over and over. The people we find most interesting aren't the ones who talk the most or have the craziest stories. They're the ones who make us feel heard, understood, and valued. Think about the last conversation you had that actually felt good. I bet it wasn't because the other person was performing for you or trying to impress you. It was probably because they were genuinely present, actually listening, and responding to what you were saying. That's the secret nobody talks about. Being interesting isn't about you at all. It's about how you make other people feel. I used to go into every conversation with this mindset of I need to prove I'm not boring. So I'd try to one-up stories or jump in with my own experiences before the other person finished talking, or steer the conversation toward topics I knew a lot about. And every single time, I'd watch the conversation die right in front of me. Because conversation is not a competition. It's not a performance. It's a connection. The biggest lie I ever told myself was that my personality was the problem, that I needed to be funnier, smarter, more interesting, more anything. But the truth is, I just needed to stop trying so hard to be something and start trying to connect with someone. And that shift in mindset, man, it changed everything. So if you've ever walked away from a conversation thinking you're boring, I want you to do me a favor. Stop blaming your personality and start looking at your approach. Because I promise you, the problem isn't who you are. The problem is how you've been taught to show up in conversations. And that's something we can actually fix. I should make a note here. This isn't about faking anything or pretending to be someone you're not. In fact, it's the exact opposite. It's about dropping all the crap we think we need to do to be interesting and just being real. Because here's the thing, we're hardwired to really hate fake people. So trying to perform or put on a show, that's actually making you seem more boring, not less. Look, I know this might sound simple or even obvious now that I'm saying it, but when you're in the middle of a conversation that's dying and you're panicking, trying to figure out what to say next, it doesn't feel simple at all. It feels like you're drowning and everyone's watching. But that feeling, that's just proof that you're approaching it wrong. And the good news is, we can fix that approach. So here's where we're at. You're not boring. You never were. You just didn't know the rules of the game you were playing. And now that you know the real problem isn't your personality, we can actually start talking about what does work. But that's coming next. All right, so now you know you're not actually boring, which is great. But knowing that doesn't automatically fix your conversations, does it? Trust me, I learned this the hard way when I kept having the same painful interactions, even after my big revelation about approach versus personality. So, let me tell you about the moment everything clicked for me. I was talking to this friend of mine about a new video game he'd just started playing, and I could not have cared less about video games at that point in my life. Like, genuinely, zero interest. And my old self would have just nodded along, waiting for my turn to talk. Or worse, tried to change the subject to something I actually cared about. But this time, I decided to try something different, something that felt almost too simple to work. I got curious, not fake curious, not polite curious, but genuinely curious about why this game mattered to him. So I asked him what made this game different from all the others he'd played. And you know what happened? His entire face lit up. He started telling me about the story, the characters, the mechanics, and I found myself actually getting interested, not because I suddenly cared about the game, but because I cared about understanding why he cared. That conversation lasted 2 hours, and at the end of it, he told me I was one of the easiest people to talk to. Me, the guy who knew nothing about video games. That's when I realized the first real hack that changed everything for me. Curiosity is the cheat code for interesting conversations. Not curiosity about topics, but curiosity about people. See, I used to think I needed to know about everything, so I'd always have something to contribute. But what I actually needed was to be genuinely interested in understanding the person in front of me. Now, I know what you're thinking. How do you fake being curious about something you don't care about? And that's the thing, you don't. You can't fake genuine curiosity because people can smell fake from a mile away. But here's the secret. You don't have to be curious about the topic. You have to be curious about why that topic matters to them. Let me break this down because this is where most people mess up. When someone tells you about their weekend hiking trip, your brain immediately goes to one of two places. Either you think hiking is boring, so you zone out, or you start thinking about your own hiking experiences, so you can jump in with your story. Both of these approaches murder the conversation in cold blood. What you should actually be thinking is, what did this experience give them? What made it meaningful? So instead of asking generic questions like, how was it, or where did you go? You ask things like, what made you want to go hiking this weekend? Or, what was the moment that made the whole trip worth it? These questions do something magical. They signal to the other person that you're not just waiting for your turn to talk. You're actually trying to understand their experience. And this brings me to the second hack that completely transformed my conversations. Active listening, but not the boring corporate training version, where you just nod and say, a lot. I'm talking about the Carl Rogers version, the one that actually creates connection. This guy literally revolutionized therapy by figuring out that the most powerful thing you can do is make someone feel truly heard. Here's how it works in practice. When someone tells you something, you paraphrase it back to them in your own words before responding with your own thoughts. Not word for word like a parrot, but the essence of what they said. So if someone tells you they're stressed about work because their boss keeps changing project requirements, you might say something like, "So it sounds like the constant uncertainty is making it hard to feel confident about your work." And then you wait. You let them confirm or correct or expand. I cannot tell you how many times this simple technique has made people stop mid-conversation and say, "Exactly, that's exactly it." Because most people go through life never feeling truly understood. They talk, people respond, but there's always this gap between what they meant and what the other person heard. When you bridge that gap, even just a little bit, it creates this instant connection. But here's where I messed this up at first. I thought active listening meant I had to be some kind of therapist, sitting there analyzing everything people said. I'd paraphrase their words back, and it would come across as weird and clinical, like I was performing some technique on them instead of connecting with them. And that's because I was missing the most important ingredient: authenticity. You have to actually care. You have to actually want to understand. If you're just running through the motions because you read it in some guide or watched it in a video, people will feel that fakeness, and it'll backfire. This isn't about tricks or manipulation. It's about genuinely showing up for another human being. And when you do that, when you combine real curiosity with active listening, conversations stop being this scary thing you have to survive and start being this incredible way to connect with people. Now, I want to address something important here. You might be thinking, okay, but what if I'm just not good at asking questions? What if my brain freezes and I can't think of what to say? Been there? Still happens to me sometimes. But here's what I learned. The pressure you feel to say the perfect thing is actually the problem. Because when you're stressed about what to say next, you're not actually listening. You're just waiting and panicking. So here's a technique that helped me when I get stuck. Focus on feelings, not just facts. When someone tells you a story, there's always an emotional undercurrent. They're not just telling you what happened. They're telling you how it made them feel. So if you're not sure what to ask, just tune into that emotion and ask about it. How did that make you feel? What was going through your mind when that happened? These questions work almost every time because they show you're paying attention to more than just the surface level story. Look, I'm not gonna lie to you and say this stuff is easy. It takes practice. There were times I tried to be curious and it came out awkward. Times I paraphrased something back and got it totally wrong. But you know what? That's all right. We're all in this together. The point isn't to be perfect. The point is to actually try to connect instead of trying to impress. And here's the beautiful thing about all of this. When you stop trying to prove you're interesting and start trying to understand people, something weird happens. You become more interesting. Not because you changed your personality or learned new facts, but because people feel something around you that they don't feel around most other people. They feel seen, heard, and understood. And that's more valuable than being the funniest or smartest person in the room.